The following lecture was presented by Howard F. Dossor to the Existentialist Society in Melbourne, Australia, on the 6th of February 2018. Howard Dossor is a freelance writer and lecturer who has long been engaged in an examination of the nature of the self and its relationship to both society and the wider world in which each individual lives. Here is Howard Dossor.
Let us begin with an epigraph from the American novelist Willa Cather. In a letter written in 1923 to a friend, she declared, "Life caught me up and carried me away." 1. Life. At the crux, at the unimaginable centre, is a silent, invisible shimmer. Such is its persistent rippling that it infiltrates everything and continues active universally. It permeates the whole, instilling quality and significance within it. We call it life, and it is the quintessence of meaning. Life is motion, change, the transformation of this into that, the interrelation, interdependence, the very unity of this and that. It is chaos become order, nothingness become something. Life is the resounding expression of reality. It is all the verities, all that underpins us, all that we encounter, all that we dream of, hope for, plan for, all that we can ever anticipate. Life is the very fabric out of which we are cut, the shape into which we are fitted. Life is yesterday in the act of being spun into tomorrow. It is the now of today being ticked and tocked into the grandfather clock of eternity. Life is the warp and weft of our encounters, the knitting together of experience to cover us all under the quilt of a being in common. Life, the spiritual and the infinite are identical. None has reality without the other. It is not man's consciousness that gives birth to life, but life that gives birth to consciousness. The human mind is a thought in the universal mind. Life is the pre-existent cosmic consciousness out of which all perceptivity is projected. All materiality is a temporary manifestation of the spirituality of life, all being no more than a nascent state of pure essence. The senses are sensors of the incorporeal world that is the native domain of life. Frederick Jackson Turner accounted for the popular expansion of American civilization ever westward as a response to a shifting frontier, ranging from the eastern seaboard through the Appalachian Mountains, through the Mississippi River, to the rolling prairies, the Rocky Mountains, and thence to the Pacific coastline. Following Turner, and with the attainment of the coastline, the American psyche identified new frontiers, such as the moon, forever calling the national genius deeper into an expansive experience. But the most authentic, alluring frontier is the cutting edge of progress upon which life tests itself and its own capacities as it draws us together forward and upward. Life is not a static entity that is injected into inanimate objects to give them mobility. It is itself a dynamic process of movement, of development. It is an intrepid explorer, engaging energetically with mystery and constantly adding to its own identity. It consists in the endeavour to become more than it is, to increase its own potency and exponentially to express its own creativity in an effervescent overflow of innovation. Life, as an exhalation of breath in the form of a hurricane, bears seed to the desert, overlays the sun-scorched yellow sand with the promise of greenness, moistens it with abandon, and watches the prairie blossom. Bison lick their lips. Deep in a rock crevice, catching its breath within the silver magic of a liquid drop of rain, life readies itself to spring forth yet again. Wedded to an adjacent trapped seed, it insinuates itself into it, generates it, expands it, and gives it growth until the crevice is crested and a flower is born. A broken fragment of glass catches the glint of the sun, and warmth is transformed into heat. A breeze stirs a leaf till it touches the glass, and confluence is followed by conflagration. Life is a forest of burning rage, spewing out undergrowth, scalping treetops, toppling stately pines, and scattering wildlife, but never in wanton destruction, for out of the ashes arise the tendrils of green resurrection. Destruction becomes creation in the repetitious victory of life. Life is in the end and in the beginning. Man cannot traverse, cannot encompass life. He can never transcend it. He can only penetrate further into it. He can know no higher value, for everything he imagines or creates is fashioned into yet another constituent of life. Man and his works are encased in life as hydrogen and oxygen are encased in water. The ultimate contest is not between the life and death of the body, but between the presence or absence of life in the existent being. Simply to exist is not necessarily to be imbued with life, while participation in life is the summum bonum of existence. 2. Man. Any attempt to answer the question, what is man, is perhaps likely to find its most promising beginning in the question, who or what is God? This is because, from time immemorial, man has defined himself in terms of being created by a divinity and being under an obligation to either the many gods of a pantheon or the single deity of a monotheism. The fact, then, that man is driven by the notion of a God may be one of the most important things we know about him. But what does it tell us? It tells us, surely, that man is born with an innate understanding that there is more to him than can be instantly detected. It tells us that there is in the offering a higher state or condition. Man's sense of awareness of a God is a clear indication of his understanding of a need to develop into something or someone that transcends what he currently knows himself to be. God is a symbol of human aspiration. The overwhelming need of man to ascend is implicit not simply in the history of his dalliance with religion. It is everywhere apparent within every culture he has ever devised. His theories of education, science, knowledge, maturity, and all his principal concerns are expressions of the need to ascend. Jean-Paul Sartre defined man as a useless passion. If we discard the adjective useless, we can agree that man, as an inbuilt feature of life, is a passion. He is a crucial agency of energy, and he does explode from time to time in the form of creativity. Nor can his passion be contained. It can be misdirected and can produce negative effects, but it is fundamentally directed at the enrichment of reality. But how, it will be asked, can we view man as ascending when we know that after his 70 years and 10, he sinks into death? Does not death ensure that an upward movement can only be tentative and attenuated, or even simply delusory? And if it cannot continue, is it not ultimately without meaning or value? Apart from the fact that we erroneously tend to equate our individual life with life itself, rather than as a constituent part of it, it is also the fact that, by and large, we are yet to learn, as we have noted in the case of the forest fire, that life encompasses death in its creative thrust. Suffering and death are as much a part of life as are smiling and feeling warm, and all are experiences that are to be undertaken as we take the upward path. Fyodor Dostoevsky, charged with anti-state subversion, was condemned to death by firing squad. He was reprieved in a dramatic last minute that transformed the remainder of his life. Speaking of it, he recorded that if he had to choose between an eternity standing on a narrow ledge, enduring every privation and discomfort imaginable, or plunge from the ledge to his instant death, he would choose to remain on the ledge. Properly understood, Dostoevsky's choice is the ultimate victory over death because it is an absolute affirmation of life. Nor should we fail to note the significance of the ledge itself. It is suggestive of some degree of ascent already attained and of a further height that remains to be assailed. 3. Mind. For man, there is no greater window on the known world than his own mind. Not only is it his eye on reality, but it locates him within that reality and opens up to him untethered vistas and perspectives. The mind is the key with which man seeks to unlock the mysteries of not only this, but other universes, and thus extend and enrich his own existence. Man can never comprehend his own mind, since it is the only instrument he has for comprehension, and an instrument cannot comprehend itself. Not even the neuroscientist can capture the mind, for it is not confined to any physical organ such as the brain. No matter how much it may utilise and operate through physical phenomena, yet the mind is not defined by them. Underlying the activity of the mind is a deep-seated notion of wholeness. But for the mind, wholeness does not mean a completeness, a fully realised pattern. It means, rather, a network of relationships. Wholeness consists in being integrated within that ever-extending network itself. The essential function of the mind lies in recognising the constituent parts of the network and identifying the nature of the relationship that exists between those parts. The mind itself is relational by nature. In order that it might fulfil its function of identifying relationships, the mind must reach out beyond itself, and it is of its very nature so to do. It reaches out to grasp aspects of the real. The mind is intentional in character. We may say of it that it has the deliberate purpose of encompassing more reality by recognising how everything within reality fits together. Further, in recognising connections, it facilitates new connections. In its outreaching, the mind actually creates more reality. In reaching beyond itself, the mind does not act indiscriminately or randomly. Even when it sets out from a position of apparent ignorance, it is seeking to build on whatever prior knowledge it possesses. The mind acts on the basis that to that which is already immediately grasped, more can be added. Nor does the mind reach out lethargically. Intrinsic to its intentional character is a high degree of intensity. In struggling to attain the more it knows to be available, it energises its activity with what we might call passion. The mind is an intensification and focus of the passion, the life that permeates man. The act of being human entails not merely the possession of a mind, but the operation of that mind in accord with its essential characteristics. To underutilise the mind is to denigrate life, while to enhance life, man must vigorously engage the mind in an interaction with reality. The greater the intensity of that interaction, the higher the quality of life. While all analogies are limited in their application and value, we might think of the mind in terms of a newborn child seeking the mother's breast with an urgency, knowing intuitively that its own life is dependent upon the sustenance that is available from the breast. Man sustains himself at the fullness of the fountain of life. Thus, the mind that contemplates only itself, or that engages principally or primarily with that part of reality which is closest to it, limits the quality of the engagement with life. The higher forms of knowledge flow from the mind's examination of reality from the perspective of the universal. The mind operates optimally when it extends itself beyond the known and deeply into the unknown. It does this by complementing rationality through the application of a variety of faculties which include speculation, wishing, dreaming, hoping, and meditative reflection. Mind has no interest in beginnings or ends, although it may utilise these as categories of temporary convenience. This is because it has no awareness of past or future per se. Mind operates within an everlasting present that contains past and future within itself. Mind operates always on the frontier of the new, embracing past knowledge and anticipating a forward movement from its present position. The mind resists all invitations to think only in conventional or reactionary terms. No matter what temporary value it may contain, every ism or ology established by man is a potential barrier upon the pathway of the developing mind. The alive, alert mind will insist upon the freedom to meander at will through the labyrinthine ways of meaning, responding to its own inclinations and the intensity of its own interests. The mind of the individual connects us to a social reality which operates what we might call the common or political mind or social consciousness. Social consciousness, in turn, relates us to universal aspects of reality. We find ourselves engaged in a foundational cosmic interrelationship. Increasingly, we become aware of an expanding cosmic network underlying the very broad nature of reality. To the degree that man increases his awareness of and engages with the universal mind, he acquires the ability to escape the limiting restrictions of space and time. When the genuinely free activity of the mind is allied to the unlimited possibilities that it might explore, it becomes legitimate to speak of the mind itself as a new world, constantly engaged in the act of creating or extending itself. Mind, lamented H.G. Wells at the closing year of the Second World War, is at the end of its tether. Today, even more than in the middle of the 20th century, man finds himself, no matter where he is located on the globe, virtually defined by a desperate attempt to eke out a living in the midst of a hostile and forbidden culture that seems to be mindless. To counter this situation, we must, like Wells, recognise that we are in a race between education and catastrophe, and we must at last affirm that education, properly understood and enhanced, centres on the awakening and continuing stimulation of the mind. The finest instrument man has at his disposal offers to open a doorway on a future beyond his wildest imaginings. Utilised at the highest level, the mind elevates man and brings him into accord with his essential self, and in so doing, it maintains him on an upward trajectory. 4. Intuition. Man does not live within or by his mind alone. William Blake identified imagination as an additional window of the soul to complement the 5 senses that feed the mind. But there is yet another source of insight and understanding that man possesses. It is universally experienced, but insufficiently acknowledged as being crucial to our interaction of the world, or with the world. It is the mysterious phenomenon of intuition. Intuition may be defined as that strange propensity we have for comprehending something instinctively without having recourse to the process of conscious reasoning. It is an awareness we have without turning our head that someone is standing behind us, or that sudden certitude that a friend needs us to contact them. We are prone to think of intuition as a hunch, a feeling in one's bones, an inkling, a sneaking suspicion, or a vague notion. We might even try to identify it in more precise language as an innate impression. But by whatever name we call it, we know it and admit it as having validity with our interaction with the world. Intuition is an unarticulated language that knows nothing of grammar or syntax. It enunciates itself silently in the hidden recesses of the human and admonishes, instructs, and encourages us with as much clarity as any articulated speech. A man may open his hearing to that language by embracing an extended world. If critical rational analysis is the product of the mind, intuition may be seen as the product of human sensitivity. If the mind reaches outward to grasp at meaning, sensitivity acts as a magnet that draws meaning into itself. Intuition is an indication that man is in a two-way interaction with reality. Literature, and especially poetry at its most incisive, is a highly proficient conduit of intuition because it is generally recognised that the meaning being conveyed by verse is hidden between the lines and behind the words. It may be that the very purpose of literature is to take us beyond the rational and into the universe of the intuitive. The American commentator Roger Shattuck has pointed out that when we read a work of fiction, we do not turn our back on reality. The fictional characters enter into our imagination and we explore their attraction and their significance. Our imagination, in a sense, confers life on them and sets them in the personal world in which we ourselves live. As a consequence, reading promotes within us what Shattuck refers to as flicker. As we read, we flicker alternately between the real and the imaginary worlds, and in so doing, allow intuition free rein. Intuition, like imagination, enables man to step spontaneously outside space and time and comprehend dimensions of reality that lie beyond sensory perception. In entering these dimensions, a man embraces mystery as an integral component of life and enriches his immediate world by looking at it from a different perspective. Mystery, rather than being a domain to be feared, becomes a repository of potential enrichment. Science may be regarded as man's endeavour to satisfy his hunger and quench his thirst for self-realisation. Intuition acts as a determinant that maintains that hunger and thirst. Science seeks to make the definitive statement about man. Intuition is a reminder that no matter how much we might learn about ourselves, we shall always remain more than we can identify. Enlightenment through education challenges us to engage in personal development, but it does not direct our behaviour towards any particular model of what it is that we ought to become. If we address the question passionately, however, intuition gives us a clear understanding of what it is towards which we should strive. Education may concern itself with condition, while intuition argues for direction. In the final analysis, science must remain silent with respect to values, but intuition is, in essence, a subliminal assertion of the highest values. The declarative academic voice at the lectern speaks to us of what, where, when, or which. The inner voice speaks to us of why. Intuition seems to possess a degree of freedom that is lacking in science. Science, relying to a perhaps perilous degree upon the scientific method, approaches the closed door and knocks with an almost submissive temerity. Intuition breaks down barriers in its enthusiastic determination to expose the real. Intuition speaks to us in diverse voices. It comes in the still internal whisper, but it comes also in the artistic vision, including, as we have noted, the rhythm of poetry or the voice of the memorable fictional character. Then, too, it can be heard in the mysticism of the myth or in the shape-shifting of a dream, whether nocturnal or experienced during our waking day. Part of our required education may lie in increased capacity to interpret those media of communication in order that intuition may express itself to us more emphatically. It may be that we need to develop our sensitivity as much as we need to develop our mind. The genius is perhaps best characterised by his or her ability to transcend the world of the predictable and the expectant, and to draw clear insights from the esoteric store of intuitive insights. Genius lies in the appropriateness of the response one makes to the sudden flash that impinges upon our inner vision. It is the product of man's management of his own intuition. 5. World. It is reported that Alexander the Great, following his victory in a final battle, sat and wept that there were no more worlds remaining to be conquered. Whatever poignancy resides in that anecdote is traceable not to Alexander's frustration as a fearsome warrior, but to his folly as a human being, because the truth is that there is no limit to the worlds awaiting man's discovery, creation, visitation, or conquest. As Robert M. Pirsig has pointed out, what we call reality is less than a single grain of sand lying on any of the Earth's countless beaches, while around the globe, tidal flows are creating new beaches continuously. Thus, there is always something new beyond the horizon. The fact is that in identifying any answer to any question that he might ask, man creates a new question and thus pushes the horizon further away from himself and creates a new challenge to his explorative nature. Because the human body appears on the surface to be a finite object that can be submitted to scientific analysis and clinical description, it is easy to suppose that the day will dawn when we will exhaust its secrets and make final definitive statements regarding it. Surface skin, internal organs, viscera, and skeletal secrets will, we suppose, reveal all to the inquiring mind. But such a conviction ignores the evolutionary drive of the body to develop. The changes fashioned by life impact greatly on the physical being that we experience ourselves to be. Had modern scientists been able to examine the ape of the distant past, it is unlikely that they would have uncovered the potential now realised by that ape and given expression in the shape of contemporary man. What lies within us is constantly undergoing modification, and any prediction as to future outcomes can be, at best, only speculative. In concord with any change wrought by the process of evolution, man himself plays an identifiable role in effecting change within his body. Today, we run faster, jump higher, swim longer, and compete more competitively than we did a century ago, because we have increased our physical prowess as we have gained deeper insight into the nature of the body and its reactions to a wide variety of stimulants ranging from food to alternative lifestyles. The French novelist and diarist Anaïs Nin has pointed out that in going to the moon, man has not travelled very far. He has, she said, much further to go within himself. And indeed, the further reaches within himself are inexhaustible. But then, of course, man does not occupy only an inner universe. He is constantly exploring the uncharted waters and breathtaking, ever-changing vistas of this spinning globe. The space within man connects to the space beyond him, opening up limitless fields for exploration, development, and assimilation. Seen from outer space, the Earth attracts with an exquisite aura and a captivating beauty. The further out one might travel, the more beauty one might perceive. But perhaps even more than by the beauty, we might be attracted by the infinity of everything. Or perhaps we cannot distinguish between the infinite and the beautiful. The concept of even a momentary participation in the endless expansion of worlds beyond worlds should be enough to enable man to meet every challenge that confronts him. Apart from his own body, and the vastness of space, there is another world into which man has made a tentative entry, but which remains virtually unexplored in terms of the peeling back of its relevance to life's advance. This is the world of social interactions. By and large, man has accustomed himself to think of each individual occupying a separate world that runs parallel to millions of other worlds occupied by other individuals. We tend to think that our unique nature and its relationship to the world constitutes the world, and it is only to a greater or lesser degree that we are willing to allow other individuals the right to occupy their world. Following the challenge laid down by Marshall McLuhan in 1964, there has been a deliberate attempt to expand our thinking until it encompasses the concept of the global village. Such a step should be regarded as no more than a prelude to what is required. The world we occupy is a single world. The alleged differentials perceived between my world and yours are a product of an immature understanding of what the existential self actually is. We are as much social as we are individual. Because we are interlocked together within an indefinable whole, we need to redefine the personal as an amalgam of the one with the other. We are born into a we-ness. It is difficult to identify a single negative aspect of contemporary world cultures, including political instability, crime and poverty, that would not be redressed to a significant extent by a focus on the real problem, the failure to incorporate the concept of both the individual and the social within our understanding of the nature of the self. The book of Genesis opens with a myth of creation in which God works assiduously for 6 days to create the firmament and the earth and bring into being all the life forms that dwell within and upon them. Finding all things good, he rests on the 7th day. It is an appealing myth, but it is deficient in at least one important respect. There is an ever-recurring 8th day of creation. We awaken to it every morning of our lives, and we are offered the opportunity to participate in its creative thrust. And finally, 6, assent. In his confession of an English opium eater, Thomas de Quincey gives an account of the Italian painter Giovanni Piranesi climbing a flight of stairs. As Piranesi, famed for his paintings of confining prisons, ascends, he has his mind fixed on the landing to which he aspires. But as he reaches it, he discovers that it is but a launching pad to another flight of stairs. He climbs higher, only to find that with each new level attained, a new flight of stairs emerges out of the gloom, necessitating his further endeavour. There is no top story in the ascent. To set out from the hills and feel the incline increasing beneath the feet is an exhilaration. Calf muscles relax into the task. Shoulders slope ever so slightly forward. Ahead is the crest, but one climbs not so much to reach it as simply because it is there. It is the climb itself that enthralls. With each step, the air becomes more rarefied, so that the heart stirs with a deeper resonance. Purpose and performance become one. Vision expands. Effort and environment blend. The climber becomes the very world as it gently folds him into itself. There is another image that can be used to represent ascent. Consider an exploding ball. We are told that the universe is expanding and that it is doing so at an exponential rate. Some have supposed that the expansion will eventually stop and then, by a reversal of energy, become a contraction, ultimately returning the universe to a minuscule dot. We do not know what will happen, but for the moment, the expanding universe is a dramatic and powerful enactment of ascent. In fact, however, ascent has little to do with space. It is not a climbing higher or a broadening. It is not measured in distance, nor yet in time. Ascent is a matter of quality. It is an increase in value. This is why it may be symbolised as an ongoing transformation of matter into spirit. Simply expressed, ascent is a form of growth, of becoming something new, of transforming the existing self. But at a more profound level, ascent is a metaphor for continuance, expansion, enrichment. Not enrichment in the popular sense of material wealth, but in the sense, again, of an increment in quality. We do not ascend in part. Ascent is holistic. Our right arm does not extend exclusively because we raise it above our head ahead of our left. The entire body rises with it. The whole of the body attains a new height. Likewise, if an individual rises, society rises. We ascend together. We do not ascend exclusively into the future. We ascend also into the past and into the present. With a backward glance, we reap more and more of the wisdom contributed by our forebears, extracting it and using it to wedge open more and yet more of our own potential. And in terms of the present, we peel it back, layer upon layer, utilising the life-enhancing insights provided by our neighbours. History is composed of the transformation of actual events into a spiritual tradition in which everything coheres. It is a process, an ascent. The future is an aspiration that becomes open to us first through anticipation and then through the translation of anticipation into event. That is, in constituting the future, we engage in a process, an ascent. No matter in which direction we choose to travel in time, backwards or forwards, the journey is an ascent. The ascent transcends history and the future, for as we engage in it, time ceases. It becomes an eternal now. Observe the work of an artist as he stands before the canvas, or look at the actor on the stage. We can see immediately that their industry is creative, that it is a form of ascent. What else is the ballerina's pirouette but an ecstasy of ascending? And who of us has not ascended through the incisive insight of a cartoon, the invasive beauty of an operatic aria, or the still crystal of a stunning photograph? Through the inspiring work of the artist, we step outside the physical world and enter the domain of the spirit, the very essence of life. Ascent is not a singular characteristic activity of life. Activity is not something life does, it is what life is. And in similar vein, humanity is not some frightened, stranded species lost in a meaningless universe. We are par excellence beings in ascent. The sedentary, the stationary, is a denial of our natural function and a betrayal of our integrity. Man becomes himself by becoming more. The ascent is not progress into some pre-existent state. It does not lead to a condition of eternal bliss and contentment. Indeed, the ascent is a perpetual, painful struggle as it seeks to generate newness. It may be an easy matter to speak of life as the most significant noun in our language, or to speak of ascent as a philosophical principle that demands our attention. But what does it mean to the individual human being struggling to make sense of his or her place in the world? Perhaps we can do no better than to think of the ascent into the fullness of life in terms of what Theodore Roszak has spoken of as a deeply grounded sense of accomplishment and satisfaction that arises out of a harmonic resonance with reality. And so we would do well to note the insistence of Morris Friedman that it is a folly to attempt to define man while failing to take into account what he wants or ought to become. Ascent, we conclude, is critical to our self-definition. It is the crucial key to our identity as a species. Thank you.
The address to which you have just listened is an abstract from Howard Dossor's published volume, Man Ascendant. In addition to a broader amplification of the themes dealt with in the address, the book has chapters on energy, time, spirit, relationship, art, and mystery, through which the focus on man's engagement with the expansive nature of life itself is further explored. The book is available through Amazon.com.